Grace and peace, and welcome to our podcast this afternoon. No, I'm not Pastor Joseph, but I am Portia Hewitt. And no, it's not Wisdom and Revelation, but tonight, rather, it's going to be Dynamic Women in a Changing World. Dynamic Women in a Changing World. And we welcome you to our podcast this evening. Before we get started, I would be remiss if I did not say something about what's happening in our world, particularly the storms that have been ravaging the South. We're just so grateful that God has caused the bulk of the anger in the storm to actually see so that Florida was not as devastated as it went through the Carolinas. Hurricane Milton, I had mentioned to my husband, we have a friend named Milton who lives in Florida, and I'm just so grateful that the bulk of the storm actually was not as bad as they were expecting it to be. And to Milton and his lovely wife May, and also to our friend Dee, who's in Sarasota, and I'm sure so many of you have friends all over Florida. I understand that it's uncommon for it even to go into the Orlando area, some of the areas that they're not used to getting that level of storm. So some of the things that have occurred over the last a couple of weeks have just been very unexpected, but we just thank God that we have help, that people are out there. We'd like you to know that people are praying for you all over the country. We'd like you to know that you are in our thoughts and in our prayers, and we remember you. And if there's anything that we can do to help, we're looking for ways that we can also help, like so many. I'm thankful. I'm hearing wonderful reports about just regular people who are doing everything that they can. And just in case you think that because you're far away, because you don't have a lot or don't have a lot, or um, you're not strong, don't have the resources, that there's nothing that you can do. That's not always true, because just the little things really matter. And praying for people, kind words, and doing whatever we can, sending to the resources of the people who can get the help to you really matters. So I just encourage everyone to continue to do that, to be part of what we're doing. We're a unity community, we're neighbors, okay? We have love one to our neighbors, and it's important for us to remember one another. And, I pray. Oh, I was talking to my husband, and just, we look at all the blessings that we have. Sometimes we think that we don't have a lot, but then when you see people losing everything, you recognize how good God has really been to you. When you think you have shelter, you have a warm bed, you have air conditioning, you have heat, water, electricity, just the necessities of life, and you have everything. It makes you even that much more grateful, when you see that there are people who don't have just the bare necessities. And I know we can be such a needy and complaining people. One of the things that used to really bother me would be, people in church, who would have so many complaints about, oh, my life is so miserable. My thing is, do you have a job? Yes. Okay. Do you have a home? Yes. Do you have clothes? Yes. Are your children safe? Yes. You know, we're sitting here at a 90-degree temperature. Our city is 90 degrees, but we're sitting in a 65 cooled environment, and we're so miserable and complaining about how horrible our life is. And I think it's a wake up call, and it just makes us remember that we are truly blessed of the Lord, and we should really be grateful no matter what state we find ourselves in, to be content. And I'm not talking about the people who are ravaged by devastation. I'm talking about those who are not ravaged by devastation, namely, you know, ourselves, even here in Michigan. Yes, we all go through things. Yes, we all have tests and trials. And, it doesn't mean that life can't be difficult. It doesn't mean that you don't have blows. But, for us to just remember that, there are different seasons, that people go through things, and just being there for each other is so important. And it just means so much, and I just think it's very important for us to remember those of you who are going through a lot during this time. So you're in our prayers, and, we'd love to hear from you if you're able to tune in. We would love to hear from you even on tonight because we're here, and it would be a blessing for us to find ourselves together in this forum, even during this time. So, what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is my new podcast, and I'm looking forward to bringing to you. Hopefully, we'll be ready to go full throttle, in November, and it will be entitled "Dynamic Women in a Changing World." And typically, if you're not a woman and you're tuning in, usually there are a lot of women that do tune in, but perhaps you know a woman who would be interested or who could benefit from this type of a podcast, but it's called Dynamic Women in a Changing World, and it's not only about just women things, it's things that affect women, but, women affect your life. So if you're a man and you have a woman in your life, then this could be something that would be very, interesting to you and hopefully of a great service to you as well. It took me a while to actually go through, we talked about, starting up this new podcast after doing 30 years of ministry has been a really interesting venture. And in doing the concept for this particular podcast, I have been going through different types of classes. You can find everything about podcasting, blogging, websites, and all kinds of things online. So I actually went through a whole class that actually helped me with the concept of how to put my podcast together. What is it that I really want to talk about? What kind of guests do I want to feature on my show? And how could I actually be of benefit and of service to people who would tune in? What would make my podcast different? And prayerfully, I believe that God has given me this answer, Dynamic Women. Uh, just the whole, title, dynamic, of course, means that we are women who are changing and growing. To be dynamic means that there's motion and change and growth. So it's very important for us to see ourselves as not being the same all the time or have arrived at a certain state. And I've arrived here, and this is my mindset, and this is my strength, and these are my gifts, and this is what I'm doing. But to always be dynamic means that we are ever evolving, changing, learning, growing. But as we are learning, changing, and growing, the world is also changing. And so, as women, we're dynamic, but we're in a world that is also dynamic. If you want to look at it like that, so it's like, how do we catch up when we're changing? The world is changing, everything is changing around us at the same time. How do we catch up? And I really don't think the answer grace and peace, Brianna. Thanks for tuning in. I really don't think the answer is to feel like we've arrived or that, we have evolved to a point where now we have all the answers. We're finally who we're going to be because we learn and grow through every decade of our lives. I wanted to share with you tonight some of the things that have really been a blessing to me. I would say over the last maybe 25, 30 years, that I have found that have helped me tremendously. And I think that um, these are tools I've shared with some pastors' wives, and I've mentioned them before. I actually had a conference some time ago, but this is one of the resources that I believe that I will use for the rest of my life. It's called Seasons of a Woman's Life. The author is Norma Jean Hinders, and I actually had an opportunity to meet her. This book, as you journey through life, there are some tools that you find that you will always keep almost like a dictionary. A dictionary is something that you pass down to your children, you always look at it, reference it, find something in it that can help you to grow and understand. And to me, this is kind of like a dictionary tool for being a woman. Seasons of a Woman's Life. I strongly encourage you, and I did with the women in the ministry, I encouraged them to buy this particular book because it's very meaningful, very helpful. And I think that it will definitely bless you tremendously. One of the things that I really like about this book is that it helps you through every season of your life. And I think before I read this book, I didn't understand um, how dynamic. a creature I really was. I think that God, began to show me things about my life in my 30s, and that's something I really want to talk to you about tonight because a lot of people don't talk about being in their 30s. People love being in their 20s. That's supposed to be the best time of your life because you're young, you're energetic, you feel that you look your most beautiful, you're the most fit, you have your energy together, you're in college, your mind is sharp and quick, and everybody loves being in their 20s and they think that, that's the pinnacle of their life. I'm in my 20s, I'm in my prime, I'm at the top of my game, and that's for men and women. You love being in your 20s. But so many things are supposed to happen in your 20s. And I think that people don't recognize that during that decade, there are so many foundational stones that are being laid that you're going to need for the rest of your life. That it's more than just being at the top of your game and having the energy. And I think that's one of the reasons why people talk about people who are in their 20s the way that they do. Oh, they're silly. They don't know anything, and don't have any wisdom, and blah blah blah. And they say things, but isn't it interesting that when you're in that age group, of course, you can go to war, you can fight on the battlefield, you can make decisions regarding life and death, you can make all kinds of, decisions that will affect countries. Okay, at that age, and um, it is an important time in your life, but there are foundations that are being laid. In your 20s, you're learning what are my values? Who am I? What are my gifts? You're deciding about your education, and I look back at the decisions that I made and some of the gifts and talents that I began to recognize that I had in my 20s. And because I didn't have the wisdom to go with the gifts and talents, I didn't understand that so many of the things that came easy to me were really things that I could have really excelled in career wise. And I just didn't understand it because it didn't feel like, work to me. It just felt like it was so easy, such as banking and money and counting. There were so many things that just I worked in a bank and I was really good at it. And it was to me, it was like fun. I get to go and play with the money, and I was really good at it. Everything always balanced, I always knew exactly what I was doing. I enjoyed talking to people. It just came so natural to me. And my manager talked to me several times, please let us send you to the American Banking Institute to become a manager. You can have your own bank. And I just kept thinking, that's not what I want to do with my life, you know? And, when I look back at it now, and it's like, it came so easy to me. I almost didn't even have to think about doing it. And, now that I'm older and I look back and I'm like, okay, that's advice that I could give to somebody. If you're doing something that comes easy to you and it feels natural and you enjoy it and it's fun, that could just be one of those gifts where you could really thrive and excel. So, looking back, that's something that I learned. But back to the foundation, laying that foundation in your 20s when it's time, you're at the peak of your game as far as your intellect, you're sharp, you have your memory, you're agile, you have your physical strength. During that decade, that's when you're setting the foundation for your life. Who am I? Who do I want to be in this world? What are my gifts and talents? What kind of difference can I actually make? Um, that happens during your 20s. And usually during that time, you're also deciding about relationships, about friendships, about perhaps who you might want to marry. And even in your 20s, at a time when you don't have a whole lot of wisdom and you think about it, you're making the decision about your life partner in your 20s when you still need a lot of wisdom, and then you marry when you're very, very young. And what I'm finding is that when people do that, a lot of marriages, make it, but then some don't. And the reason that they don't is because they they change. They recognize I'm dynamic, I'm growing, I'm outgrowing this person. They think they're outgrowing that person, but I think the wisdom that really needs to be spoken to that is that in your 20s, yes, you're going to change, you're going to grow, you're going to gain wisdom, gain knowledge, gain insights into your worldview, how you feel about things, even getting to know yourself. That's just introducing you to the world of being a dynamic being because being in your 20s is not the only decade where you grow and change and learn. That's actually setting the pace for the rest of your life because it happens again in your 30s and again in your 40s and again in your 50s. So, if we made life decisions based on change, we would make a different decision at every decade. What am I saying? I'm saying that you don't wanna have a different husband in your 20s and a different one in your 30s and a different one in your 40s. Every time you grow and change, it's like, "Oh, I've changed, I've learned, I've grown, I've outgrown you." No, people are dynamic. People change and learn and grow over the course of their whole lives. And when we have a life partner, when we pray and God gives us, who that life partner is, we're going to learn and change and grow together. So we're going to learn and grow and change together through our 20s, through those foundational years when we're setting the foundation for our family and for our life. We're going to change and learn and grow during that entire time. And so the task of the 20s is that you're getting through school, you're picking your life partner, you're establishing your household and your home, you're establishing your career, you're honing your skills, learning about your own talents, okay? Those are the tasks of a 20-year-old, whether you're a man or a woman, those are the tasks of being in your 20s. And so it's okay to have some frustrations, because you're learning. And that was interesting when I went back to school. I did have some frustrations because I didn't know how to do the things that they were telling me they needed me to do. And it's like God said, okay, you need to understand you're here to learn how to do these things. Okay. You came here because you don't know how to do these things. So I had to be okay with it. And it's the same thing with every major task in our life. When you decide that you're going to date, you don't know how to date. Okay, in your 20s, you have to learn that. And the only way you can learn that is by doing it. When you decide to establish a life partner and to marry, okay, you don't know how to be married. Okay, once just because you say I do, that doesn't mean that okay, now I said I know everything. You don't. Okay, that's something that you're going to have to learn. You're going to have to grow into how can I be married? Okay. So those are the tasks of the 20s, okay, setting the foundation. Then you get into the 30s, okay, and in that decade, the 30s is a very complicated, it's very complex because for me, I learned and God really carried me through it. There were so many things that I had prayed for in my 20s. I had prayed, for a career. I prayed for a husband. I prayed for a home. I prayed for ministry so that I could serve the Lord, and I just prayed for so many things. Children, I prayed for children. And I was 27, I believe, when I got married. I had my first child when I was 28 years old. Interesting enough, coming from a family of 4 girls, I had the first boy. So, that was really something because, no one had had a boy, and I didn't know much about men because I was raised with women. My dad worked 3 jobs, he wasn't home a lot, so here I am now, I have a husband, that's a man, I have a boy, that's a man, okay? So I'm surrounded now by something that virtually is not really that familiar to me, so I had to learn and I had to grow into how do I handle this home with now a husband, then having a boy. I had a house, I had a job. Okay, I was working in the ministry. I had all of these things going on at the same time, and these were all the things that I had prayed for in my 20s, but because I didn't have them, I didn't know what it would be like to actually have them as a part of my life. And so that was a task for me in learning. Now, all these things that I've prayed for have become a reality. How do I actually handle them? How do I handle being a wife? How do I handle being a mom? Being a homemaker, being a corporate employee, and how do I juggle all of these things and be successful at them? And keep my relationship with God, because I was very dedicated to my church home. I was working in ministry. I was singing with the choir. I was involved with the youth department, involved with the Sunday school department. Um, I was involved with almost every department you can think of. I was involved, at the same time. And so all of these things that I had to do, I had to juggle those things when I was in my 30s, and I found myself, in prayer asking God, "Lord, how do I manage all of these things?" And God had to sit me down and actually minister to me. It's like all of these things are the things that you prayed for and you asked me for, and now you're realizing all these things. So these are the things that I had to ask God. You have to help me because I prayed for these things and you answered my prayers. And God began to show me, that this is the time when you're going to have to find the joy of the Lord to be your strength. This is the time that you're going to have to reach outside of yourself and learn how to be a loving wife. Okay, what it actually means to be a wife, to be a homemaker, to be a mother, because you have people who need you and people who are depending on you. And not only that, you have people in your life who love you and people who you love and that God has given you responsibility for. And so now the whole aspect of being responsible, that was different from being in my 20s because of course I was on my own and it was just me. And if I felt like doing it, I did. And if I didn't, of course I didn't. If I didn't want to cook, I didn't cook, you know. Um, but when you have a whole family, when you have a whole household, you can't do that. People are depending on you and you have to be diligent, you have to be faithful, and you have to do whatever is required to get the job done. And you have to do it, with your might, and you have to do it daily. So you can't always take a day off. You can't decide I want to take a day off of being a wife. You can't decide you want to take a day off of being a mom. You could take a day off of your job, okay, but you're an employee, but you can take a day off. But, those were the things that I really wrestled with. And I found in ministry that there really weren't a lot of people who talked about what it's like to be in your 30s. Um, One of the things that I used to hear my coworkers talk about was, it's kind of downhill from here because, I really was dreading, leaving my 20s and turning 30 because, in my 20s I was cute and I always had the excuse, I don't know everything, and I'm just young and I'm cute. I heard my coworkers say that and I thought, wow, I never looked at being in my 20s like that. But then when you cross over into your 30s, people recognize you as being really fully grown. It was funny, a movie I used to watch, Tammy, she said, I'm fully grown. Um, because she recognized that in her 30s, when you're in your 30s, you can't give excuses. You can no longer give excuses. You can't say, "I don't know." You can't say, "I'm not equipped." You can't say, "I'm dumb and stupid. I'm not wise. Nobody told me." You can't do that in your 30s. In your 30s, you have to figure it out. You have to work it out. You have to walk it out, okay? You have to buckle up your bootstraps. You have to be strong, and, you have to get the job done. And so I just found that, the transition going into the 30s was a time when, I became so overwhelmed by all the responsibilities when it really hit me, all of the things that I was responsible for. I felt like there was an elephant on my back. That's how I felt because, you know, I had little children who actually needed me. They could not navigate life without mom and dad, when it came to school, their schoolwork, when it came to their home life, when it came to their needs, food, clothes, shelter, all of those things. Your little children, they need you. They can't navigate through those things, without you. So that's what I meant when I said you can't take a day off. But you find yourself overwhelmed because everybody needs you, and as a woman, one of the things that I said to the women in the ministry is that, you wake up one day and you realize that everybody has a piece of you. Your body, everybody in the house has a piece of you, Um, and that's when it really hits you. Okay, I'm really doing this for real and I'm setting the pace for the rest of my life of being this person that's connected to everybody else. And then you're watching your children grow, and your children are dynamic because you think of them when you have them. First I had my son, then I had my daughter almost 3 years later. They were both still quite young and quite small, so now I had 2 little ones who were dependent on me while I was a wife, a homemaker, a mother, working in ministry, and a corporate employee. And so, you had to juggle it all, and I was talking to my daughter one day, and she said, "How do you do this?" You had to go grocery shopping with 2 children, how did you do that? How did you manage, being in the store, or bad weather, or loading up the groceries, or, whatever it is that you're doing, you have 2 children, and you have a job, and then you've got church, and then you've got your husband, you know? So, those are really the tough I think those are the tough years, and I think 30s is the hardest decade because that's the time for most people, when the children are most dependent. Now it's kind of different because, statistics are showing that people, are getting married later. So the tasks that you had in your 20s before, many are having those tasks in their 30s now, where they're laying the foundation for their family and starting their home, and their children are small, and they're having that in their 30s now, where in our generation, it was in their 20s. I was kind of late. Most of my friends married a lot earlier than I did. I was going out of my 20s. A lot of them had married going into their 20s, but now they're waiting, and they're having their career and their travel, and doing all kinds of things, and then getting married later and having children later in life. And I found a great difference between being 28 and 31 having a child, because even your body is different. So that was a big difference, but that I would say that's the toughest decade, as far as responsibility and dependability, because everyone in your home is depending on you, and your children are small, and they can't do it without you. They need you there. The next decade is the 40s. In your 40s, for me, that was the best ever because in my 40s, I was still energetic and youthful. My children were independent, high school, okay, about to go into college eventually. Eventually they could handle their own lives, their own homework. They're still kind of dependent, of course, because you got your food and shelter and things like that. But they could handle themselves, their homework. They didn't depend on me as much. However, they do depend on you in a different way, because I will say in high school, they were depending on me for advice, for counsel, to be there to listen, to help them navigate, those tough years, those teen years, getting ready to go into the 20s when they would have to make very important decisions, foundational, decisions for their lives, and they need their parents. So it you find yourself not being as physically taxed because you don't have to pick them up and carry them and do all the heavy lifting and all the housework and everything. You don't have to do all of that like you did, in your 30s. But because they need you in another way, in your 40s, you find yourself, being pulled on, as far as decision making. And then you also find that because they're starting to make decisions, they're not always making the right decisions. So you find yourself being a counselor, a lawyer, you know, kind of getting them out of trouble, kind of helping them navigate through bad decisions, being there for them, and that, of course, that can also be financial, that can be mental, emotional, spiritual. It could be, navigating their first romantic relationships, having the first boyfriend or the first girlfriend, and going through the emotions of the breakups and relationships and all those kinds of things. So you find yourself still being there for them, but it's quite different when you're in your 40s because you have to learn to kind of pull back and allow them to make their own decisions and choices. And sometimes that includes letting them make some of the wrong decisions and some of the wrong choices, and allowing them to learn from the mistakes that they make, because you can't grow if you don't make mistakes. And I see some of you are watching. If you have a question or a comment or something that you'd like to add, I would. And I see some of you are watching. If you have a question, I have you right. Oh, I have you right here. Uh-oh. Okay, let me get that. Okay, got it. Okay, I have you here, so I can actually read some of your comments or questions. Oh, here's a question here. Okay, okay, I have it here. Did you ever feel lost, like you didn't know what to do with your life because your children were more independent. Okay, that's very interesting. I think that some people actually kind of start going through that usually when their children are older. I didn't really well, I guess I wouldn't say I felt lost because I think girls are kind of like that naturally. Where I know I was. I was a girl who was very independent. Okay, most of my life, I was kind of different. I've always had kind of my own mindset. Will kind of go off to myself, try to figure things out. I wasn't one who was always dependent, on my parents. But I really think that had a lot to do with the generation that I grew up in, because in our generation, your parents were your parents. They weren't your friends, they were your parents. So in our generation, once I went to high school, and I was on the city bus, I was on the bus. So when I would leave out in the morning, I was out all day on my own, and I could make my own decisions, where did I wanna go after school, what bus did I wanna get on, who did I wanna go with, of course, I had rules and things, about it because a lot of my high school friends had cars, so there were rules about that, do you get in the car with this friend, and now it's different because when my children went to high school, I had to really talk with them. You have a car to get to school. You can't just let anybody get in your car. You don't know if they have weed in their bag. You don't know. There's so many things that you don't know that could actually get you into trouble. Now it wasn't so much so bad like that when I was coming up. But I think you have to recognize your children for who they are. You may have a child who seems to be independent, but I like was it Growing Pains? I think it was a show I used to watch, and it was funny because the children were all talking about how their parents, just let them grow up on their own. And when after they grew up, the mom actually sat down and told them, "You didn't know, but I was following you and I was hiding in the bushes." So you thought you were out there on your own being independent, but I was still watching over you. It's a hard thing to allow them to just be out there and not feel the burden, of being concerned and, I don't wanna say worried, but always concerned about them. But you may have a child who's more independent, and I think when that happens, you have to allow them to talk you through things, ask them what would they do, listen. Just have scenarios where you listen, and you may not always like what you hear, and even, have their friends. I used to love having their friends in the environment, because I wanted to see what kind of friends they had. So my house was an open, there was an open door because I wanted to know who their friends were. Who are your high school friends? Who are your church friends? Who do you gravitate towards? What are they talking about? What do they look like? What do they wear? Who are their parents? What are they doing? And all of those things, knowing things about them, I think helps when your children are independent because it's showing you their judgment, it's showing you the things that they're interested in, it's showing you who's in their life and possibly how they can be impacted or influenced by certain people. I also believe that as you get older, one of the other things that I learned getting older into my 40s when my children were both in college at the same time is that I went back to school because it was such a blessing. And this person had asked about, having your children independent. What do you do? Well, one thing that I did was something that I always wanted to do was finish school. And I was able to do that in my 40s to graduate before I turned 50. So it gave me something else to be interested in so that I didn't have to micromanage their lives, even though as parents, we want to do that. We it's not good for them to do that because it actually cripples them where they're not able to think for themselves, to make decisions, to get themselves out of trouble. Sometimes they're gonna make bad financial decisions. Sometimes they're gonna have to bite the bullet for that, and learn how to fix it, and learn a hard lesson so they don't do it again. Um, Independence is, it can be scary, but it's very necessary because when we have them, we're only stewards over them. We feel like they're ours and they belong to us, but as they grow up, we learn over time that they really don't belong to us, they belong to God. And it's an independent walk. So I hope that's helpful. I see some other comments. Rachel Johnson. Hi, Rachie. We're never fully independent. We still need you. Oh, that's so sweet, Mookie. Thank you. It's such a blessing, to be needed by your children, and I have to say, while my mom was here, even being an adult with completely grown children, there were times that I would call my mom. I would call my mom. Um, Sometimes I would call about a recipe, or if somebody got sick, I'd have a question about that, or and after she passed, in 2020, that was hard for me. She died during the pandemic. She did not die of COVID. She had, cancer. But I found myself for the next probably 2, almost 3 years, when I get in the car, I would still pick up the phone to call her because that was my thing. When I got in the car, I would call mom, or have a that was my ride. My ride was mom, and, for it took 2 or 3 years for me to really, settle into the fact that she wasn't there to talk to and ask those hard questions, and, just somebody that I knew always had the answers for me, you know? But, yes, it's a blessing to be needed, but as a mom, I have to say, I never want to be in the way, of, either I have a grown son, 38, and a grown daughter, 35, and I never wanna be in the way of them navigating through life and learning, how to handle the hard times, but I'm always here if you wanna talk through it. I think it's important as a parent to always be there and let them talk through it, and sometimes when they come to you, they're not coming to you for the answer, they're just coming to talk through it and maybe hear your wisdom, and maybe they can use some of what you said and maybe not, but sometimes perspective is important, and sometimes them hearing themselves say it and just being able to put a voice to it becomes helpful. Because until you actually say how you feel, sometimes I've learned that adult children don't really know how they feel or why until they actually put a voice to it. So it's important to just listen and let them say it. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. I'm trying to address all the questions. Okay, so that was talking through the 40s. Then going through the next decade, which is the 50s. Now, for me, now this was just me. It was quite interesting because for me, still being somewhat energetic, I found that to be a very exciting time. And for some reason, I did things that I didn't want to do when I was younger. I wanted to wear 4-inch heels in my 50s. And for some reason, I felt that was a good idea. So I actually did that. I went and bought all these tall shoes. I did the whole makeover. I got a new haircut, new hairstyle, new wardrobe. I'm one that believes that every decade a woman should do a makeover, because if you keep up with fashion, you find that there are certain things that are appropriate in your 20s that are not appropriate in your 30s, and certain things in your 40s that are appropriate that are not appropriate in your 50s. And I know everybody says, well, what's appropriate for you is what's appropriate. But when you look at real fashion, the fashion industry, being an older woman, I should not be trying to look like I'm 20, okay? Because nothing about me says I'm 20. My face doesn't say it, okay? My countenance, my personality, nothing says I'm 20. So I'm giving you a mixed message. If I look like I'm 50 and I act like I'm 50 and I'm dressing like I'm 20, I'm giving you a mixed message, okay? Okay, that's just me. Let's see, Brianna. Okay, Lady Portia, can you talk about losing friendships in your 30s? Ah, yes, I can. Losing friendships in your 30s. I believe one of the most critical things that happens to a woman, is that she begins to recognize who her boosters were and who her life relationships really are. Because I always told my daughter, you have people in your life for different reasons, some for a reason, some for a season, and some for a lifetime. And by the time you reach your 30s, you're beginning to realize who you are, how you feel, how you think, what's important to you, and what direction you want to go in. And I believe that just as you're discovering that, other people are discovering that too. And unfortunately, some in this culture that we're living in, some people want to be in their 20s for the rest of their lives. And if I'm in my 30s and I'm looking forward to being a dynamic woman, I have recognized that where I am in my 30s, I'm not going to be in my 40s because that would be a problem. Because what that says is that now I'm stagnant and I'm not allowing myself to grow and to mature and to be dynamic. Okay. Sometimes you lose friends because you're not going in the same direction. Sometimes you lose friends because Mm, I think that pretty much sums it up, not going in the same direction. It could be emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, it could be relationally. Okay, perhaps you want to be married and they don't. Perhaps they want to go party, you know, and you don't. Okay, perhaps you've decided you want to be a serious servant of God, a serious Christian, and you found that holiness actually matters. And we're living in a very compromised world. So you may find that you have friends who have decided compromise is good enough for them and you don't want to compromise. Or you find that um, being able to speak your mind and have someone who respects you for who you are is very important. And you may have friends who can only have friends who agree with them all the time. You know, so you just find yourselves surrounded by different types of people. For me, I have always found that people who respect who I am, how I think, and still being okay with being who they are, as long as they're okay with who I am, those make the best friends for me. And I have friends who are Republicans, Democrats, Christians, not Christians, but the main thing that's important is that we respect each other and we give each other space and room to be who we are, to grow, and to be okay with that. Okay. And I think that's very important. And I have found at this age that someone who is not okay with that, it makes it very difficult to be a true friend because true friends love you. They love you and they respect you. I hope that that answered. Maybe you want to follow up, Rachel. Um, it was so true. I found some of my best friends in my late 20s and early 30s. We are who we are going to be. Yes, absolutely. So you find friends that are aligned with who you are. That's said. That's very well stated. Um, and that doesn't always happen in your 20s because you're still kind of getting your footing in your 20s. And I think that unfortunately, you have people who grow. Well, I guess it's not so unfortunate. You have people that grow at all different levels. You have some people, I have found even in my own friendships with people that did not complete the task that they should have in their 30s. And in other words, what they should have learned and how they should have matured, they did not until they got into their 40s. And because of that, there's additional heartache and additional problems that come and additional lessons or I like the way my husband says you can add chapters to your life. That perhaps God is the author and finisher of our faith, but perhaps we're adding chapters that God did not originally intend, just like Jonah. When you think about Jonah and how God told him that he was sending him to Nineveh to go and tell them that they needed to repent, and that God wanted them to turn to him. And Jonah decided that they were evil people and they didn't deserve to repent and to have a relationship with God. So he decided not to go against God's instruction, and he found himself on a ship going down to Tarshish, and then the great winds and the storm and the hurricane basically or whatever in the ocean, and he finds himself telling the people, they're like, well, why are we having this big storm? He told them it's because of me. I'm not supposed to be on here. He knew he wasn't he knew he wasn't supposed to be on there. He was going in the wrong direction. He throw me overboard. He winds up in the belly of a whale. Okay, so that was a chapter Jonah didn't have to have. It was a chapter he decided, okay, because he disobeyed what God told him because he didn't agree with God. And that's a perfect example. Sometimes we don't agree with God. We don't like what God has instructed us to do and how has instructed us to live our lives, the decisions that he has told us to make. We don't like it. So we decide to do something else. And then we find ourselves with the wrong man. We find ourselves with the wrong friend. We could find ourselves living in the wrong city. Okay, we find ourselves doing things, adding chapters to our lives because we don't agree with God, simply because we don't see it eye to eye. We don't see it the same way. Oh, I don't think it takes all that. Oh, I don't like that. Oh, last time I did that, I got my feelings hurt. Or for whatever the reasons are, we decide to add chapters to our lives. Okay. And we find that we've added chapters that were unnecessary. And so sometimes that happens with the people in your lives. Okay. You can have people in your life that you really love who are your friends that decide that for some reason, they're gonna do the wrong thing and add chapters to their life. And you have to make a decision, am I going to go with them into this chapter or am I gonna let them have this wrong chapter that's unnecessary that they shouldn't have? I still love them from afar, and when they come to themselves and we can get back together. Sometimes you have to make those decisions. I see a lot of dialogue here. Okay, good. Okay, so the 50s, I found, like I said, I did the big makeover. I went into the 4-inch heels. I finished my degree. That's when I went into a social worker job. I went out from the church. I was still in the church, but I decided that because I had gotten this degree, that I actually wanted to be relevant, more relevant, because I had been working in the church for 20 20 years, and I wanted to get back out into the world and see what are people talking about now? What is it like now, for people? What is the mindset? Who are these people? What do they aspire to? What is the culture like? So I went back out into the culture. So I had a journey, a learning growth journey. And it was tremendous. It was absolutely tremendous. But also included in the 50s was something called generativity. And I learned that this new feeling that I was having, a need to give back. That's something that you get in your 50s, and that's really the age for women who should be mentoring women. Okay, that's really the age, and I'm finding, I know this probably not going to be a popular dialogue with, a lot of women, because I know it's very popular in the culture today that women in their 20s and 30s are becoming mentors. But, I can honestly say clinically, um, and biblically that the way God designed it is that the older women mentor younger women, and there's a reason for that, because you've gone through your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, you've completed the task of each decade, and your perspective of life has changed and grown. You have had many experiences, you have worked through. You've gotten the kinks out, the bugs out. You've not only that, but something else that I discovered is that you emotionally grow. You actually emotionally grow, and some people think that that's just because of life's experiences, but it's not. You actually step over a threshold where it's like the lights come on like never before, and it's like, wow, I never saw life like this before. And it's not only because of your experiences. Age and emotional growth are real. The same as I use the example, you wouldn't teach a kindergartner trigonometry. Why? Because their mind has not developed to understand trigonometry. And I actually learned in my 50s that there is an emotional threshold that you cross. It actually starts in your 40s. You cross this threshold, and it's like the lights come on and your mind opens up and your emotions become so clear, and it's like, I never saw it like this before. I just didn't understand it. And you actually bump up a next level of maturity in your 40s and 50s. And so you get to a point where now you can mentor, and in your 50s you want to give back. You want to help the women who are coming behind you. Not just women, I'm sure men experience this as well. You want to help those coming up, the generation coming up behind you. So every single decade has a task. And I just strongly encourage you to grow. I hope you're looking forward to our podcast. I have some amazing women. In fact, I'm meeting with one Saturday. I'm meeting with one on Saturday, and I have some other meetings that I plan on having to invite guests to come on the show. Some of them are clinical psychologists, some are homeschooling, some have been married, have children, homeschooled. I've just all kinds of women um, who are dynamic, who are growing and changing, and who can add to your life. And I'm very excited about this podcast and some of the guests that we'll be having and some of the conversations that we'll have that I hope will, enhance your life. My daughter, she'll be coming on. I'm very excited about her and her journey. And there are a lot of other I have pastors' wives, I have, friends and people that I've spoken to that, are waiting for me. They're waiting in the wings. My son has written some beautiful music for me, some, podcast music for me that's almost ready. So we're getting things all lined up. So hopefully, within the next, 4 weeks, we can fully launch and just start putting things out there, so that you'll have, a rich resource to pull from that will help you, in the decisions that you make and help you to grow and to learn and to understand yourself better. Because I think a big part of this growth journey is understanding yourself, knowing what to expect, being able to navigate the stormy seas and recognizing how you feel, put a voice to it. I think that's very important. And I'm hoping that that's what this podcast will do, dynamic women in a changing world. I'm hoping that it will help you to put a voice to your changes, your growth, your transitions, your journey, how you feel, what you're going through, so that it will be of great benefit to you. So hopefully this has been informative to you and you've enjoyed the discussion tonight. I've enjoyed interacting with you on Facebook Live. Keep the comments coming, and I hope that people, as they watch later on, will continue to build the dialogue because I find that to be very helpful. I think that it's important for us to be in tune and in touch with each other and to share, to learn, and to grow together. Amen. Thanks so much for tuning in. God bless you.